I would like at this point to take time for a non-commercial break. You're used to commercial breaks on conventional TV. So the non-commercial break is I'm going to pitch something to you, but it's not for sale. I'm giving it away. I've come up with an idea for a Nobel Peace Prize for Sustainable Development. Now, you can't have a Peace Prize for a field, so we need candidates. You can have organizations or individuals. We've got one organization and two individuals. The organization is the Club of Rome. Now, why the Club of Rome? The Club of Rome commissioned a report in the early 1970s called The Limits to Growth. And that really started the sustainability movement because they had this huge computer model on the then supercomputers of the day, and they programmed it to try to predict trends, macro trends, population, forests, ocean life, the ecosphere. And it always indicated that human population would crash unless they adjusted the assumptions to assume that we actually dealt with our environmental problems quickly. Now, that was in 1972 it was published. They've updated it since. There's a 2002 update, I believe, and it's still tracking their predictions. So it is the most, or one of the most, quoted books in all of the scholarly literature about sustainable development. So it is one of the roots. So the organization that commissioned it, the Club of Rome, is one of the nominees. The second is a gentleman whose name is not a household word, Dr. Herman Daly. Dr. Daly was for 6 years a World Bank senior economist in their environmentally sustainable development department, and he is known to be the father of ecological economics. There's a big misconception that the economic system that we have is the only one possible. Not. But we've been using that one system for so long, it has taken command of the universities of the world, and so we no longer realize there are alternatives. Well, ecological economics starts in a place that says you have to consider that the limits of the earth are the limits of the human economy. Whereas the current system, which is actually technically called neoclassical economics, says there are no limits. We run out of fish, we'll eat something else. There is a flaw in the system, and that's why we are in very serious condition, because the current economic system, the only word, their pseudo-religion is growth. If you grow, it'll solve all problems. Whereas ecological economics says there are limits to growth. Now, the third candidate needs no introduction, Pope Francis. Pope Francis, who spends every day probably teaching and preaching about ecology in one form or another, and fairness and equity and all of the human values, the things that make us most human, came out with something called the Papal Encyclical this year. And it is very enlightening. And he really indicates that we have an economic problem, that the ecological problem, the roots are an economic set of roots. And I found this wonderful picture of Pope Francis, so I'm going to start calling him the Green Pope. Okay. Now, these three candidates are integral to the prize. The Nobel Peace Prize for Sustainable Development, and it's at NP4SD. Now, if you're out there in the TV audience, in the webcast audience, and you're doing Facebook, please segue on over to NP4SD. And for the public, you do an endorsement. But there are millions of qualified nominators, so go and check out and see if you're one, because there are millions who don't know that they are.